We're continuing our study through 2 Timothy. We're landing in chapter 4, which you might know if you're following along. And so we're near the end of this, and you start to see sort of the reflection of this is the end of Paul's life. And you can see that in the text. And, it's funny if you've ever been with anyone, not funny, haha, but it's when you've ever been with someone near the end, and on their deathbed, I've never found anyone who wished they'd worked more. I've never found anyone who wished they spent less time with family. And usually, really, the most important things start to have clarity in your life. And so that's where he is. And those of faith really realize how important that is and how it's been, even if it's something they've neglected a little towards the end. And so sort of the image we get, as this is kind of Paul's final charge to Timothy, sort of the image I get is he's kind of like family gather around as someone's passing away. That's sort of the image I have of Paul. It's not that that's happening. And really, it's kind of a serious tone. And so Paul's going to start off in 2 Timothy chapter 4. He says, I solemnly urge you in the presence of God and Christ Jesus, who will someday judge the living and the dead when he comes to set up his kingdom. And so someday he will judge the living and the dead. Now, eventually, I always say, it all wraps up. And I picture a lifeguard, like Jesus is the lifeguard. And at some point, if you've ever been a lifeguard, they kind of go, that's it, out of the pool. And that's kind of, at some point in history, at some point in life, Jesus is going to be like, everyone out of the pool. And ultimately, there is this judgment that we will all get. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, it says, in verse 10, for we must all stand before Christ to be judged. We will each receive whatever we deserve for the good or evil we have done in this earthly body. And ultimately believers will be rewarded for their work. Paul uses this metaphor of building to describe our work for God in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, where he says, anyone who builds on that foundation may use a variety of materials, gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, or straw. But on the judgment day, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder has done. The fire will show if a person's work has any value. If the work survives, that builder will receive a reward. But if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer great loss. The builder will be saved, but like someone barely escaping through a wall of flames. Now, it's not real popular for a pastor to get up and talk about judgment and hell, and that's a weird way to start a sermon for some of you. Although there's some churches you go to, that's pretty much all they talk about every week. But ultimately there is this judgment. And I think a lot of people, and maybe if you have this tattoo, don't say anything, but you've maybe seen Only God Can Judge Me. And I remember, there was like a meme or something. The guy was like, that's worse, right? Because, we kind of judge each other, and we can judge a little wrong. But often we think we're good. Only God can judge me. Well, the problem is, most of us have offended God in some way. That's why we need forgiveness in Jesus. But judgment, it's true. And, if you'll live differently, if you really believe that ultimately there's this final exam, where God looks at the way you've lived and, says, hey, this is good or this is bad. And it can be comforting, though, in a lot of ways, because if you live in the way God has you to live, you can find comfort because you don't worry so much about what other people think. Right? Because there's certain periods in your life, and I've been reflecting on a few of those. We're reflecting on some as we drove, to the church building today. And it's like, there's times in your life, especially when you're a younger teen, that you kind of act in ways because you kind of the group peer pressure, and you act and behave in ways. And then it's like you get older, and you still do it though, because that's why men have green lawns. We feel this peer pressure to have the best lawn around, or I don't know. There's all kinds of, we don't ever really shake it. It just kind of changes. But there's these ways that we live, and not all that's bad. It's okay to have a good lawn, I guess. I don't know. I don't have one, so I wouldn't know. Mine is biodiverse lawn, which is, we just weeds and we shear them off. But it's comforting, though, to know that it really doesn't matter what everyone else thinks. It really only matters what God thinks. And that can give you a singularity of purpose in the way you live your life, because you're not worried about how, people perceive you. I mean, you do your best to be perceived as Christ-like, but ultimately, that's what you worry about is, am I living right for the way God would have me live? And Revelation 21:7 says, all who are victorious will inherit all these blessings, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. But cowards, unbelievers, the corrupt murderers, the immoral, those who practice witchcraft, idol worshippers, and all liars, their fate is in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. And most of us, if you have guests coming to your home, and you're in America, what do? You clean up, because unless you're that person who lives with your house in perfect order all the time, God bless you. I hate you. No, most of us, but even if it's kind of clean, you're going to tidy up, you're going to vacuum, and there's all kinds of things we do, during the week before Sunday. We're vacuuming up cobwebs and, things and cleaning up because people are coming to the house, so to speak. And we do that with our own house, and we tidy things up, we clean up, we throw everything in that one room and lock the door and go, I don't know what's in there. We do our best because we're preparing for someone to come, right? And there's a saying in England, apparently, there's the smell of wet paint wherever the queen goes. Because, if you have serious guests coming, you're going to paint things over, touch up, and make things kind of look their best. And we do that with earthly guests. But really, we should prepare for the coming of the King. We should prepare for the final coming of Jesus in the way we live our lives and the way we do things, because ultimately that's the biggest guest to come, if you will. And we don't know ultimately when the end will come. And so we have to live ready. I've said a few times, and I actually said it at a funeral one time, and some people got it. It's, live your life in a way that I don't have to lie at your funeral. Because you go to a funeral, there's an old joke where, the pastor was talking about how wonderful this person was, what a good person in life they were, and one of the family members walked up and peered in, and they're like, what's going on? We're just making sure it's the right person. Awkward. But, because, we kind of want to speak the best, but there's times where, our life really should be lived in a way that people can speak good of you in the end. And you have to live in a way that you're not embarrassed, ashamed when you die and you meet Jesus. There's this story it's called the story of the virgins. And message, I'm going to kind of reading from the message in Matthew chapter 25. I'm going to jump around a little bit. God's kingdom is like 10 virgins who took oil lamps and went out to greet the bridegroom. 5 were silly and 5 were smart. I don't know why I like it silly. The silly virgins, the silly girls, took lamps, but no extra oil. The smart ones took jars of oil to feed their lamps, and the bridegroom didn't show up when they expected, and they all fell asleep. And in the middle of the night, someone yelled out, "He's here! The bridegroom's here! Go out and meet him!" And so the 10 got up to get their lamps ready. The silly ones, "Oh, our lamps are going out. Lend us some of your oil." They're like, "Hey, I don't know. There's not enough oil to go around." And so they run out. They have to buy oil and stuff. And it's this, and they, but the answer is there might be not. It says, but when they're out buying oil, the bridegroom arrived, and everyone who was there to greet him had gone into the wedding feast. The door was locked. And there's this custom that kind of there'd be a parade, and they would be kind of going with their lamps. And so everybody who was sort of invited got in. And then the 5 who were out there looking for their oil, they weren't ready. And so when they show up later, they show up, and the knock on the door says, "Master, we're here. Let us in." He goes, "Do I know you? Who dis? I don't think I know you." So stay alert. You have no idea when he might arrive. And the point being is, the virgins, they were like bridesmaids in this procession, and they would follow him back, and said, "No, hey, is this person a party crasher?" And the whole point of the story, is we get kind of caught up in trying to figure out some of the details and the cultural things, is that you have to be ready. You be prepared. And so ultimately, you have to be prepared because you never know when the end is going to come. It could be the end of all of creation, all of things. It could be just your end. Like, how many times have you read in the newspaper a story, and then you figure out it was even someone you knew who was, gone like that? And it's the older I get, it's hard, especially when it's someone young, which, a lot more people seem young to me now that I'm slightly older. I'm definitely in middle age, as long as you live to be 200. No, I feel that. Anyway, but ultimately, faith gives us hope, and our hope is this eager expectation of Christ's return. To believe in a life in the presence of God after this one is over. And if we really believe that, because it's kind of Christian theology. If you go to church, you probably kind of roughly believe this, right? Like, this is not completely new. But if we really believe that, then we should live differently. We should live in this way of preparation ultimately for that. And that's what Paul's talking about here. And in 2 Timothy 4:2, he says, preach the word of God. Be prepared whether the time is favorable or not. Patiently correct, rebuke, and encourage your people with good teaching. Now, this passage is often read in the context of like kind of an ordination service. And, I don't know how many of you have been to ordination service. I don't know what's the plural of that, services. And a couple of you have. I'm not much on ceremony, if you haven't guessed that yet. But once a year, I have to go to this big ordination service that we do in our fellowship of churches. And you'll actually see me in a suit. Which is kind of rare, and it's actually formal. We have like those things you grew up, they're called souls, and it's like you have it and you're giving it to your ordinee and everything, and it's like fancy. And I have one at home because I stole it, but I'm bummed. No, I didn't. I got it when I was ordained years ago, and it's in the back of my closet. Even further back than my suit. But I'm not much, but there's something kind of powerful about that thing. And it's really sort of a powerful ceremony because there's like all these people of different ages and backgrounds, and a lot of them I've gotten to know over the years as they kind of go through that process. And it's a beautiful picture of things. And so you might be saying, well, Jeff, this applies to you, not me. So like, I'm out of this one. So this is just for Jeff. Jeff, preach the word. Nope. It really kind of, it was directly to Timothy, but it really applies to all of us, doesn't it? Because in some way, all of us preach the word. It's advice for me, but it's true for you. Because you will be, most people are not going to come. I would like to think that, everyone's going to come listen to my sermon and I'll preach the word. But I've looked at our YouTube count. We're not hitting that many people. It's like, well, on Facebook, if you look at Facebook count for people who watch your message, it's like high. It's like thousands of people. I have, it's like you think, man, in pastoral ministry, we call those vanity metrics because it kind of started for a second when it scrolled through someone's feed and then Facebook's like, look, you got a view. But ultimately, most people are not going to come hear my message, but the way you live your life, the words that you speak, we're all kind of preaching the word and preaching what truth is. And whether that's with your family, your friends, or the people you work with, ultimately your life should be a sermon. Your life, someone has said, your life is the only Bible some will ever read. And so, not to put pressure on you like everyone's salvation hangs in the balance of you living it out right today, but there should, the way we live should be affected ultimately by our faith. And if the way we live isn't affected by our faith, you really have to go, do I really believe? It's funny, and this is sort of a word to pastors too, and I can't tell you, there's certain sermons I know when I preach, people are going to leave the church. I can almost tell you before it comes because I'm usually praying because I know. And when we hit those, I know someone's going to leave the church because I've been in this game long enough that I see it. And so I'm probably right. Now, not everyone who leaves the Deepwater Church does so because of a serious sermon or sin. I don't want to we're not gangs, we're not stabbing each other when we leave here, not the Sharks and the Jets or something. We'll make the gangs a little more safe and friendly. But many do. And here's the thing, is a lot of people just aren't going to like truth. And there's a lot of parts of the Bible, because we preach through the Bible, you kind of get stuck preaching things that aren't always popular because it's in the text. And it's great for a pastor because if I'm preaching on money, it's not that offerings are down. I'm like, it's in the text today. So, but when you preach some things, it's awkward for people and they will leave. And so there is this encouragement. It doesn't matter. You have to preach the truth. And now that's true for me. It's true for you. Because you still have to believe and proclaim truth, whether it's popular or not. And in culture, it gets hard because often our culture is at war with the way Christianity presents the way to live. Now, we do our best to present truth well. I'd rather have people get mad and leave than have to stand before Jesus and explain why I skipped that part. I'd rather deal with hurt people than a disappointed God. And so, we have to be prepared whether the time is favorable or not. And I think a lot of that has to do with whether people are in a place that they're going to listen or not. Life is short. I'll tell you, it's like I start talking to somebody about something. I was like, that was 30 years ago. Now, those of you who are younger, because we got the kids in the service today, every day seems long. If I told you had to wait a week for ice cream, you'd be like, man, that's so long, isn't it? But I'm at the age now where a week flies by. I often am like, oh, I gotta get ready for Bible study on Saturday. It's Friday already. Fortunately, I had it done weeks ago. But you know what I mean? Your weeks kind of fly by as you get age. I read talked to the guy at the copy center about that one time. We've had these fascinating discussions on time and everything. Because, everyone has that copy center friend. Right. Okay, just me. Anyway, but life is short. It kind of flies by. And Paul is probably feeling it because he's at that moment where, he's potentially going to die. It's not looking good. He's writing his last advice to Timothy. It's you're sitting there and you're thinking, man, it's really, hey, whether it's a good time or not, you better just preach it, live it. 1 Peter 3:15 says this, and 16. Instead, you must worship Christ Jesus as Lord of your life, and if someone asks you about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it. But do this in a gentle and respectful way. Keep your conscience clear. Then if people speak against you, they will be ashamed when they see what a good life you live because you belong to Christ. And so we have to humbly and gently explain our hope. Some may follow Christ because of it, just because of the way we explain it. And, the ESV says it, but in your hearts you honor Christ always. Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason, for the hope that is in you. Make a defense. And it's kind of funny because I think that one, I tend to think when I think of make a defense, it's like we kind of are putting up a fort where we're starting a fight. But it really, the Greek word there is apologia, which is where we get the term apologetics. And some of us like apologetics, right? I know there's a band called that too, but that's a different thing. It's not an apology saying I'm sorry for my faith. But apologetics is this way we explain what we believe. And I like the title, and I never finished the book, but Craig Rochelle wrote a book called Weird. And I love that. You kind of get that immediately because the way that we're supposed to live our faith can look weird to the outside world. Because a lot of the things that are distinctly Christian way of living don't seem right to other people. I remember I do some premarital counseling, and I do it for people in the church. I also sometimes do it for people who have no church attachment, end up finding me. And so I remember one time I was talking about forgiveness, and we brought this up yesterday in men's group. We're talking about forgiveness, and they were like, yeah, if someone says you're sorry, you should forgive. And I'm like, no, you should forgive even if, they don't. And they're like, what? like they never heard this. But then I went into the whole, unforgiveness is like drinking poison, expecting the other person to die. And forgiving people, a lot of times it's for us because it'll kill us inside. It usually, if someone doesn't forgive me for something, it doesn't hurt me, right? I mean, I do try to make amends and all that. But it often hurts the person there. And so that's a Christian way of dealing with things that seems weird to a lot of people in the world. I'm only going to forgive if they come and ask for it. Well, it's not for you. And so there's all these different ways we live that seem weird, and we live differently because we're convinced that there's this other way to live. And apologetics is not just about studying, but we should. I'm all about, studying the Bible. Love that. It's not just about the science apologetics, and and I think a lot of times when we think about apologetics, you might think of, if you've ever heard like some really gifted speaker that talks about all these facts and things, and you're like, oh, that's pretty awesome. But I think a lot of times apologetics is just sharing what happened to you and why you believe and how it's changed your life. You may not know all the deep details about how Paul's letter in Galatians is structured like Greek rhetoric, or kind of like the deep academic stuff that only nerds like me care about. But we can all give a reason. If you've had a faith experience, if you've had this religious experience of faith, then we should be able to explain it to people just in normal words. I remember I like to irritate people. I don't know if you knew that about me. Some of you are like, yes, you irritate me every week. Thank you, Jeff. But I remember one time I was in a youth group, and I was leading a discussion, and I'd just gotten there, and kids, especially early 2000s youth group people. No, there was it's like they kind of learned the terminology enough to just kind of give an answer that doesn't mean anything. And I remember one time this girl gave this answer, and it was like textbook correct. And I was like, okay, now you say that same thing back to me, but don't use words like, saved or salvation. And it was like they couldn't, because they just learned the terminology and the way to put the words together. But I was kind of questioning, do you really believe this? And so a lot of times, I think we try to put kind of religious words to it. So don't worry if you have theological terms, but if you just explain your experience of faith, I think that's often better than like a really religious answer, because it's easy to give religious answers with a string of words that nobody understands or believes. And so it says, patiently correct, rebuke, and encourage your people with good teaching. Correct, rebuke, encourage. It's, I think about these words, and I think it's a lot like coaching wrestling, which is, it's probably all I have to say, and now we get it, right? No, I coached wrestling for years. It was just, I love football probably more than wrestling, but I went further with wrestling, and it was easy to kind of coach when you weren't there full time all the time. And what I really loved is just kind of working with a kid one-on-one, and it was just like we'd go through, and it just kind of you're mentoring them, teaching them things, and I've had people message me that I coached 30 years ago that still keep in contact, and it was just great things. But anyway, so correcting is when someone's doing something incorrectly, or because they don't just know they were taught wrong, so you have to correct, and then sometimes you have to rebuke when something they should know, or they goes against what you've taught. Sometimes you have to rebuke kids. Like wrestling, it's like people tend to want to reach back, and you're like, no, don't do that. It only works in movies. And like little things. And then you also have to encourage, because wrestling's hard. It's a really tough sport, and you have to encourage. And so it's the same with faith. There's times you have to correct. And let people know, hey, this is not right. This is what we need to believe. And then there's times you have to rebuke, where you have to go, hey, stop that. and then there's times you just have to encourage, because faith is a long journey. And it's easy for us to get tired. And it's easy for some of us on any given Sunday, some of us are tired and about ready to give up. And some of us are at a place maybe we're more encouraged. And that's when we come together, we have to encourage one another in faith. And so, all of us, and the patience is required doing all this. I love 1 Thessalonians 5:11. So encourage each other and build each other up just as you're already doing. And the goal of confrontation and correction and all this is to correct and win people back, not just win a fight. Some people do the correct thing. They do the rebuke thing, but they're not real good at the encourage thing. And so the purpose of this is not just to win a fight. Like I always say, in a marriage, you can win a fight but lose the marriage. Because some people go into a marriage adversarial. It's like a fight when you're trying to win an argument. Just give it up. You're not going to win. If you do, you win the argument, lose your wife. And so in the same way, we have to be careful in how we address and correct people. The truth is important. But how we stand for truth and present it also matters. It's not just about winning a fight or an argument. It's about encouraging people in faith. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 3 says, "For a time is coming when people no longer listen to sound and wholesome teaching. They will follow their own desires and will look for teachers who will tell them whatever their itching ears want to hear. They will reject the truth and chase after myths." People will no longer want to listen to sound and wholesome teaching. Truthfully, it's easy to sway people with untrue things. Unfortunately, you can see it on, sermons you hear on the internet. Not here, but none of the churches you were at before. No, it's easy to sway people with untrue things, and often the lies appeal to us more than truth, which again is why last week's sermon, all Scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching. No one got it? Okay. You guys need to memorize that one. Man, almost. I felt like you guys were going on that one. But, that's why it's so important to understand that Scripture is God-breathed, and it's what teaches us, because we have to base our faith not in just experiences or things we heard, but you have to base it in God's Word. And it's often not something, because God's Word is great until it grates up against something you want to do and the way you want to live that's wrong. And it's easy for people to kind of go, well, not that part's true. But we have to base our lives on, last week's sermon. Well, not last week's sermon, but what we talked about. Because, I'm fallible, very fallible. And everyone said, amen. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 5, "But you should keep a clear mind in every situation. Don't be afraid of suffering for the Lord. Work at telling others the good news and fully carry out the ministry God has given you. Keep your head in all situations." Ministry is tough. Speaking the truth can be tough. There was this quote I liked in a commentary. It says, "Where we offer instruction, some hear only narrow-mindedness. Where we offer compassionate correction, some hear only harsh judgment. Where we express God's standards, some hear only legalism or arrogance." I think that really sums up a lot of my experience. And so you can keep your head, we have to keep your head in all situations. We can't retaliate, because people are going to reject us. And we've talked about, faith is hard, there's persecution. You're not in America at the level there is other places. But, getting in a fight doesn't help. Although I've seen on the internet that people get in fights, and that seems to make them feel better. No. And ultimately we maintain the truth we know to be true. It says, "Work at telling others the good news." That's an awkward statement, because as soon as I say that, maybe you think about personal evangelism. Okay, show of hands in a minute. I'm going to ask you who did it this week. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to make you do that. Some of you were like, "Oh, no." Quickly texting a friend, "I want to tell you about the gospel. I did it this week." But for a lot of us, when we think about sharing our faith, again, it feels like this hard thing to do. But it really, if it's something that's important to you, you will share your love for the Bills. You can't see us. You will, and more Bill. I don't know how we got Bills fans here. I don't know. We were talking about football fans. But people who love a team, they'll share their love for it, right? There'll be bumper stickers. They'll wrap their car. They'll wear the shirt. I don't know, because it's important. But really, sharing our faith should be something that's important too. Now, I'm not saying you have to cover your car in bumper stickers or be that guy on the side of the street with the bullhorn yelling at people. I'm not saying you have to be that guy. But we really have to be prayerful, though, because if our faith never comes up, because sometimes we don't want to offend people, do we really believe it, and is it true? And it is important. And then I think it's also important to be Spirit-led, because there's times where, I'm having a conversation with someone when I'm also praying, and I'm like, I want to say something, but it's not time, and I know it. And then there's times where, I don't want to say something, but the Spirit's prompting me and says it's time. And even though you're fearful, that's when you have to step out and say something. And then you don't even know how people are going to react, because you might say something because you prayerfully, you think it's time, and they get mad at you anyway. But that's between them and God, not you. We have to be faithful to what God's speaking to us. Because sometimes we don't know how that's going to play out long term. You know, and so we have to be careful that we don't sort of never share the good news. But we have to be people who are prayerful about it. It says, fully carry out the ministry God has given you. We all make an impact. We all leave a mark whether we know it or not. And I saw this Facebook story, and I like archaeology and history and stuff. And yeah, they found this like 2,000-year-old brick from a town that's kind of in modern-day Algeria. And it shows like the guy who made the brick, they were able to find his full handprint and determine fingerprints and everything. And I thought that was this great idea of, you know, we all leave a mark. You may not see your mark. You know, the results of this guy's work 2,000 years later, he's long gone, but there's still like a mark. And we don't always see a mark, but we can still make a mark by what we do in life. And I was thinking, you know, it's funny, we have an older building, and some of you saw the spider thing we put out yesterday. It wasn't actual spiders. Someone hid a giant spider in a place that nobody else would go, but when we had to do some work yesterday, and we were going in places most of you will never go. There's a secret room in this church. Does anyone know where the secret room is? It requires like a lot of faith to get there, because the rickety wooden ladder that someone made scares me every time I go up. It's like hidden anyway. But anyway, we were kind of, you know, maybe it's not a great analogy, but it seemed like it was. So we actually had to cut a hole through like wood and plaster and all this stuff, because I'm still picking black stuff out of my ears. Like it was just like, it was nasty, it was dirty, Bob is too. You know, so we were doing all this. We cut this hole, we did all this thing, we fixed something that most of us would probably never even realize had gone wrong, but could have been a serious problem for us if we didn't fix it. And then we covered it back up, popped in ceiling tiles, and you'll never know what happened, right? Except later, if you want to go see, you can climb up the secret bell tower, and I'll show you. But you know, we all, you know, you make a difference, you leave a mark, but it might not be visible. So whether it's on a brick from 2,000 years ago, or whether it's doing something here that maybe nobody notices, but ultimately makes the building a good place to meet, you know, we're all making a mark. Might be hard to see at times, but we leave our handprints on everything that we touch. You know, many of us suffer from the what about him syndrome. You know, we've talked about this, but, you know, John and Peter after the resurrection, and in John 21, you know, Jesus restores Peter, and he's giving him sort of his like life plan, and it involves suffering. And in the middle of that, you know, Peter goes, "What about him?" to John, like this, because, you know, they were like, "Okay, I get suffering. What about him?" And we all tend to do that, right? Like we look at anyone else, not look around at somebody else and go, "What about them?" You know, and it was kind of funny. I was in the gym this week, and this guy, you know, he was like, "Man, you're really strong," and like I was like, "Oh yeah," you know, because I don't think I'm strong anymore, but I realize what I think is weak, I'm realizing that's strong to other people, but I've been much stronger, so I feel weak. And so I was like, yeah, I used to lift a lot. I'm now just kind of, and he's like, dude, comparison is the thief of joy, even if you're comparing yourself to your old self. And I'm like, oh, dude, preach it. You know, and I was like, yeah, you know, I should be happy that I could still move my body at my age. You know, anyway, it was a great moment, because it's like we tend to do that, right? We always compare ourselves to other people, or maybe even compare ourselves to where we used to be, and we can't maybe do all the same things. And, you know, we're all called to live in this way that brings God honor. We accomplish His purpose, but our roles and places we serve might be different. And it's easy to kind of look at other people's lives and think they got it easier, they got it better, but ultimately what matters is how faithful you are in living your life. You know, 2 Timothy 4:6 says, "As for me, my life has already been poured out as an offering to God. The time of my death is near." And really this image is this drink offering poured out. And, you know, the Old Testament, there was this idea, the kind of drinks would get poured out on the altar. And that's sort of, Paul's life had been poured out at this point. His time of death is near. And, you know, death is a funny, again, not ha-ha funny thing, but many of us, we fear death, right? Like, I mean, there's certain ways I don't want to die. Like, I have a fear of heights, and it's getting worse the older I get. And I'm like, my fear is someday I'll be in here, like, changing a light bulb on top of a tall ladder, and Denise won't hear from me for a while, and they'll come in and find me hanging upside down or something, and I'll die some stupid way, because that's pretty good possible. I usually text her and go, if you don't hear from me in 20 minutes, come get me. At least I won't be hanging upside down as long. You know, I don't want to be eaten by sharks. There's certain ways that I just don't want to die. Maybe you do. That's I used to think it'd be cool, but now I think no. But you know, some of us fear death, and you know, we really shouldn't. If we're living the way we should. You know, I love my family. I love you guys. Not hoping to check out soon. But if we live in a way that we're ready for the kingdom of God, and knowing that that's our hope, we won't fear death. Now, we won't be looking for it to happen tomorrow, but when it comes, we won't be. And so Paul continues, I've fought the good fight, I have finished the race and remained faithful. Now my prize awaits me, the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on the day of his return. And the prize is not just for me, but all who eagerly look forward to his appearing. You know, ultimately our prize is this... is being faithful. We'll have this crown of righteousness. And, you know, I've told you the story before, and, you know, we talked about it in men's group, and I don't even know if the story's true, because I see different versions of it. They give different people's names, different scenarios, but there's a story of this missionary comes back from Africa, and they've given their whole life, you know, to missions and like serving God in Africa. And Teddy Roosevelt happens to be on the same ship, and there's like a big ticker tape parade, and everyone's excited. And the way I've heard this story is the missionary's kind of grumbling a little bit to God and saying, you know, I've given my whole life to you, and there's no ticker tape parade. No one even cares that I got home, and you know, it's like kind of I've spent my whole life, and then God he felt like God whispered to him, but you're not home yet. And, you know, apocryphal or not, I don't know. It's this beautiful truth of the fact is we're not home yet. And when we really put our faith and our trust in God, and we live in a way, ultimately our reward is not in this life, but it's in the next. And then it's how we live now that matters. Matthew 24, starting in verse 43, says, understand this, if a homeowner knew exactly when a burglar was coming, he would keep watch and not permit his house to be broken into. You also must be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come back when least expected. You know, when Jesus comes back, will we be ready? You know, his first coming is in humility in a manger, think Christmas. His second one is ultimately in glory. He's going to set things right, riding on a horse, making war with the nations, destroying sin and death. And then ultimately, we all have to give an account for the way we've lived. And you know, the question is, you know, will we live our lives in a way that we're ready? You know, or will we, you know, not be ready? You know, we're ready for so many things. I remember, you know, before we had a baby, like some of you might remember this stage. It's like you pack the bag ready to go to the hospital, like you have it packed and ready. Does anybody remember this? It's like you're kind of like you're ready. Like when it's, you know, and I wouldn't think to not be ready. Like as soon as I found out you're supposed to pack a bag, man, we packed a bag. And then it's like when you carry a baby around, oh my gosh, it's like you're like a MacGyver or something. You've got all kinds of things. And it was, we were kind of at that, they hadn't had cool baby bags then, and we would carry a backpack, and people were like, why are you carrying a backpack everywhere? I'm like, we're ready. You know, it had like a little zip thing. I got wipes in here, I got that in there, I got a pad if I needed in a public place. It was like, you know, you felt like, man, I'm ready. And I wouldn't go anywhere without that baby bag, because they poop everywhere. And throw up on you. And we even had extra clothes in the car because there was, you know, some of you know. And then I have friends who are preppers. You know what I mean? Like, anyone got a prepper friend? Anyone here a prepper? No, you won't tell us because you have your secret stuff hidden. I have friends who have bug out bags, and they you know, you can go online, all the different things they have, and you know, it's like, I mean, it's crazy how intricate. There's like plans. They have to, like, I have this one friend. They're going to all head to West Virginia when it goes down, and I'm like, how are you getting to West Virginia? Do you have a vehicle that will still drive? Will there be roads? I don't know. I'm like, you need to get something closer. You just need to move to West Virginia if that's where you think you need to be. I don't know. People, truthfully, is though, here's the thing. We'll prepare for what we care about. Right? Like you're going to prepare for a baby because you have a baby because you care about the baby. You're going to prepare for retirement because you care about retirement. You're going to prepare for a vacation because you care about the vacation. We prepare for what we care about. But we need to be sure that we live this life prepared. As the worship team comes back to play, we need to live a life that's prepared, whether we're ready to live 100 years, or we die tomorrow. You have to give account for the way you've lived. And so it's important to live ready, and because ultimately our hope is eternal, not just in this life.